So Judith, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure again. We get together again. We just talked a few months ago, and now I appreciate you jumping on for this really kind of a mini conversation about hope and inspiration. We were just talking about leadership, and I'm wondering, other than who in face of unspeakable odds, Winston Churchill comes to mind as someone that was getting this constant stimuli that from an external threat, and just kept on encouraging the population to stay with him, stay with him, stay with him. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering, how this translates for our IT leaders today, going through this modern pandemic we're in.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's very nice to speak to you again and to be back. And yeah, it's been interesting. I think that, it's been a test for all of us. And interestingly, a lot of times when these type of things happen, they're industry specific or company specific. It's not this widespread, everybody's in it together. But I think it's tested some of us in terms of, okay, how do you, first of all, keep yourself motivated, and then how do you motivate others? And I think our tendency will be to just kind of crawl up in a ball and wait for it to be over. But I think that we've learned very quickly that it's something that we have to continue to keep our heads up. We have to continue to motivate our teams. And I was mentioning to you, I'm at Amtrak, and our industry has been hit very hard, transportation industry, and very quickly. So as soon as people stopped going to work and stopped commuting, our ridership went down quite a bit. And so we had to take some quick action. And so in addition to everyone learning, how do I now work remotely? And of course, many of our employees can't do that. So, in addition to those challenges that most companies are facing, we also had the overarching financial impact of it. What does that mean to the company? And how do we keep people motivated and positive, and realizing there's going to be an end. We'll get through this. And one of the things I think about is my previous industry. I was in US Silica, as CIO, and I was in sand mining, which was very closely tied to the oil and gas market. And we went through while I was there, multiple fast, rapid growth, and then the market would decline. And in those declines, I think the thing I learned after going through it a couple times is that you can't overreact, and you can't just kind of go right to making these drastic decisions that you'll pay for later, because we have a tendency to say, we need to cut costs, and we need to kind of hunker down and get down to the bare bones, and then it takes years to recover from that. And I think this will be the same thing. It's hopefully just a few months, but I think it might take a few years before we're kind of out of the impact that we've seen. And so we need to make sure that while we're in it, we're keeping that long-term view, and we're not just thinking about the now. I think honestly, our company has been very good about that, and is trying to make decisions that won't be detrimental down the road, and still, focusing on these kind of strategic, things that we need to do, but also thinking about, we have some really key talent. We've taken time to build this up.
Yeah.
How do we keep those people? Keep them, make sure they're not going to, other industries that are thriving. There are a few in this time that are not feeling the pinch. But then how do we keep them motivated? How do we keep them positive? How do we keep them to realize that there is an end to this? So that's been, I think, some of the challenge that we've had. And your Winston Churchill example, I think the fear or uncertainty or doubt or whatever it is that we're feeling can't be outwardly reflected. We have to, kind of inwardly turn that into, okay, now how do we make lemonade? How do we turn that around and make it something that at the end of this will be in a better place? And sometimes that's tough. We all need our own cheerleaders too. And I think everybody has theirs, but then we need to make sure that we're doing that for our teams too.
One of the big things you and I talked about was the role of mentors, and it was serendipitous, our conversation, because I was on this kick within the CIO forum for a couple months, and it was how you scale your intelligence, because we can't scale our brains the same way we can scale our chips and our computers. And then all of a sudden you and I talked, and because you had won the Orby Awards and the previous year, and I thought, and then you started talking about your team of mentors, and I'm wondering if this is a good time for those IT leaders to reach out outside themselves and accept input. What are your thoughts?
It's funny you bring that up because when you originally reached out to me about this, that was one of the things I thought about. I thought, well, okay, everyone's going to talk about how we work better remotely and how we communicate. Those themes will have been covered. So what can I
Sure.
kind of bring that's new? And I thought about that because, I've unfortunately seen family members, friends, former colleagues, and others who've been hit much harder. I've seen people who've lost jobs. I've seen people with significant pay cuts. And they're in a place where they need now their network. They need their mentors. They need their board of directors that we talked about, your personal board of directors. So I've tried to do that. People have reached out to me for LinkedIn referrals or recommendations. People have reached out to me to say, hey, do you know so-and-so at this company? I see they have an opening. Can you make an introduction? So, I think it's that pay it forward. So there was a time when I was in that boat and I needed people to do that for me. And now trying to do that for other people who are in a tough spot. And I think that networking and that being a mentor and kind of going beyond that, making those introductions and trying to connect people to others to help them expand their network it's critical right now.
Yeah, I mean it's now how it's interesting. I look at my board that I have, and there's a woman in particular who is the CIO. She's on the board of Red Zone, and she was the CIO of Johnson and Johnson. She was the CIO of 100 CIOs. So it was really interesting. They had 100 sub companies, and she's like a firecracker. Like, you literally can't be in her presence without being elevated. And so sometimes, and it's like almost like for me, a model of extreme leadership. Like, she's going to have a perspective that, from a frequency perspective, it's at a different scale. And so to me, making that phone call has been like a trusted source where I'm not communicating it to the employees. I'm not communicating to my families. I can kind of go, and it gives me a different perspective. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that's what I was saying. Everybody needs their own cheerleader, and I think in order for us to do that for others, sometimes we need that ourselves. So I think it's great that you have someone who's in that boat, has different perspective, and especially I think as we're kind of the vast majority of the country is in the same boat. We know there's certain people who always look at the glass half full. Those are probably the people we need to be calling right now to kind of have that perspective, because there's plenty who see it as half empty. So I think right now is the right time to reach out for ourselves, but also the right time to reach out and be that person for someone else too.
Be that person for someone else. Okay. What do you think about so a company that, let's say the country goes into a recession or depression? What opportunity is there for a CIO, given your experience in the past, to lean into that as an opportunity for IT? Is how do you see that from the leadership perspective, and how do you see that playing out in potentially a positive way?
I think all companies at some point realize that there's fat. We kind of build our teams over time, and there's I guess there's never a good time to kind of to take a step back. We're always so busy that I think we don't necessarily take time to look back and say, are we leveraging our people properly? Are we making the most use of the talent? Are our processes in a good place? Do we have the right roadmap, the right path? Are we being strategic? So we're just running. We're just trying to kind of execute and keep up. So I think for some industries now might be a good time to say, even for us, we're doing our best to preserve jobs. But we have, made some strategic decisions around stopping certain projects, which means some people do have a little excess time. Let's use that time to get them trained and make sure they're getting skills that might have been gaps in the past. Let's look at our processes internally, and are there improvements we should be making? What changes should we be making now while we have a minute to breathe and step back? That'll help us in the long term. So I think that's one, and the other is, I think, not to lose sight of the long-term picture, because like I mentioned before, I've definitely been in situations where we've made short-sighted, short-term decisions that have come back to bite us later, and have taken a lot longer to recover from than we expected. So I think it's the time to make sure we're keeping our strategic hat on, even though we're kind of acting tactically day by day.
It's interesting, some of the things that have become really clear for me just in running my own company is I think we all run, when times are great for the past 12 years, I think everybody runs a little fat. They run with a little bit of a buffer, and it really forces one to think about your efficiencies. And I think of you as an efficiency ninja, you're as a process ninja from our last conversation, but but not everybody, like you said, everybody still is trying to run and gun and trying to stay ahead and keep in pace with projects. But what an opportunity in some respects. I know for me, I'm looking at going, gosh, you know what? I need to take the next month or two to clean up this with interaction between systems. These APIs have got to work. Like, this stuff should just be cleaned up. I'm wondering if others are thinking the same way as I am.
I think so. I mean, I think that, all of us are kind of saying, how can we take advantage of the situation? What are the things that have always been our to-do list, but we never have time to do?
Yeah.
And some of it can be done without funding, it just takes some time and some thought. And so I think there's balance there. I mean, I think hopefully we'll be out of this sooner rather than later. So we can't necessarily tackle some of the big problems, but I think there's always quick wins that we can look at and, see how we can operate a little bit better, a little more efficient, a little smoother. So it's a great time to kind of step back and look at that.
What about ideas on motivation? So remote motivation, we haven't covered that a ton, other than, remote happy hours and things like that. What else has popped into your thought matrix on ways that you can congratulate people and otherwise just support the culture of the organization, what you're trying to do?
Yeah, and I think we haven't done the remote happy hours, but I've heard of a lot of others who have, and I know some folks on my team are doing that in smaller groups. But I think reaching out. I made a call yesterday. Actually, I was talking to one of my direct reports, and I said, "Hey, how's your team doing?" And she said, "Well, most of them are doing pretty well." And quite frankly, I've been really impressed with how kind of positive and optimistic most people I've talked to have been, especially in light of some of the changes we've had to make that actually do affect people personally. But it's still, most people are fairly positive. But she said, well, except for one, I was talking to one person the other day, and he's really bothered by some of the changes we're making. We had to do some salary reductions and some other things. And I said, well, would it help if I reach out? And she said, it might. So I gave him a call yesterday, and, I don't know that I didn't solve the problem for him. Because that it's still, circumstances haven't changed, but I think just to hear that, hey, the organization is listening, and we know everybody's in this together. And it kind of goes back to what we said earlier about fear and courage, because while I don't think we should show fear and negativity, I do think we should empathize and maybe show some, that we're all human.
Yep.
So not necessarily saying it's all doom and gloom, but saying, hey, I'm in the same boat as you. We all kind of had to make the same sacrifices and do our part for the company. But we will get out of this. There will be a light at the end of the tunnel. Things will be better. Stick with it. Hang in there. The leadership recognizes people are making some personal sacrifices now for the good of the company. So just that kind of motivation. And at the end of the conversation, again, I didn't solve the problem, but I think he felt, wow, somebody reached out and took note. So I'm trying to do that now a little bit more, and I've asked the rest of my direct reports, give me names of people, pointed folks who you think would benefit from that. So I think those kind of calls, and then just yesterday also got a list. We do our monthly birthdays and anniversaries, so made sure I sent a note personally to each person on my team who had an anniversary this month or a birthday, just to kind of add a little, happy anniversary, happy birthday. So, it's the little things. I don't think those take a whole lot of time, but I think it's important that people know that, hey, even though we're virtual and I can't see you face to face, I'm trying to stay in touch and we're here, right?
Well, I think that's, sometimes it's not the fancy leadership principle, but just demonstrating scaling the unscalable, which is the human interaction, making 50 phone calls to people maybe that you wouldn't necessarily make 50 phone calls to, but that you're outside of you're outside of your concerned brain, and then you're in a completely different center that's
Mhm.
more compassionate and actually resonates quite powerfully with people, because they won't necessarily think they don't associate their current work environment with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we just have to, stay in touch as best we can.
The book that I mentioned earlier, The Fear is Fuel, that what I loved, he said fearlessness, like it's silly to call being fearless in a day and age like this, because fearlessness is developed, like if you're going skydiving and you were skydiving one time, your heart rate may be 150 in frightened, but then by the time 100 skydives is gone, your heart rate is really quite low, and it's like ho hum, and you're basically
Mhm.
fearless to that event. But in this particular situation we're in with salary cuts and things like that, it might be, unless you were born, unless you're 35 and below, you've never experienced any hardship in business.
That's true.
I mean, you're sub 35. It's like, so this is going to be a completely new event. And then we talked about courage and bravery, that you've got to act despite fear, be courageous despite fear. So it's really quite interesting time to be a leader, for sure.
Definitely is. Definitely is.
I really appreciate you for jumping on this call with me, and in coming up with some really interesting new approaches to this, which came just a moment ago, with like anniversaries and birthdays, and remembering some of the things that in the midst of the chaos is as a leader, it's important to remember.
No, well, thank you. It's been great talking to you. And I really think it's a great thing you're doing. I've watched some of the videos and I'm looking forward to seeing some of the others. It's interesting to see all the different perspectives and just the angles that people and the new things they come up with. Like you mentioned the anniversaries, but I learned a couple new tricks from some other videos I watched. So hopefully we can all help each other, right?
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, it's going to change a little bit, right? 20 days from now, it's going to be a different message people have. And
Yeah.
as we get a little bit beyond the epicenter of things happening, we're going to see really interesting leadership popping out. And so anyway, I really, really appreciate you coming on, Judith, and it's a pleasure. And we'll let you know when this goes live.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
take care. Bye.
Take care.